In the last section, we wired up our action creator to the list item component. So we did run up a little bit short, as we didn't really have any component inside of here that was capable of receiving an onPress event. So we did not really have any way to make sure that we could actually call that action creator when a user tapped on the row. For that, we're going to need to import a touchable component. Now, when we previously looked at our documentation for all those touchable things, we saw that there were 4 types of touchable components. And at the end of the day, we used one inside of our button component. So if I open up my button here, you'll see we use the touchable opacity. Each of those touchable components are designed to just handle touch feedback from users. One of those 4 types is going to be very handy for us here. It is called Touchable Without Feedback. This component is designed to register a press event, but not give any feedback to the user when it occurs. And that's actually perfect for our use case, because the feedback that the user is going to get is the row expanding. So we really don't need to show a highlight or a fancy opacity change, nothing like that. We just have to expand the row, and that is going to be our feedback to the user, like the response to show like, yes, we received your tap. So let's import that touchable without feedback component and make use of it inside of ours. So up at the React Native library, we will import touchable without feedback. And I'm also going to import the view tag as well. So now we can wrap our entire JSX block with that touchable without feedback component. And then whenever someone taps on the text or the card section, whatever it might be, we can register a press event and call our action creator to select this very particular library. So we'll start off by wrapping our entire JSX block with the touchable without feedback component. So we'll say touchable without feedback. I'll do a little bit of indenting and then close the tag off. Cool. Now inside of here is all the rest of the JSX that we already had. Because I expect to have a second card section that's going to show the description of my application, I'm going to do just a little bit of work right now. I'm going to wrap this with a view tag so that when we come back through later and add in the second card section as a sibling to this one, it'll be just a little bit easier. So I've now got my touchable without feedback, I've got my view tag, and then my card section. So now we need to hook up an onPress handler to the touchable without feedback so that we know whenever a user touches this thing right here. So I'm going to pass a prop called onPress. Remember, that's how we register a callback with the touchable without feedback. And to that, I will pass a fat arrow function. So inside this fat arrow function is the code that will execute whenever a user taps on this row. So inside of here is exactly where we want to call our action creator. I want to call my select library action creator, and I want to pass it this very particular library's ID, the library that maps up to this list item, so that I can select that very particular library. So inside of here, we will call this.props.selectLibrary, and we'll pass in the ID. Notice that I don't have a reference to ID just yet. We're going to do a little bit of destructuring off of the library to get access to that ID. So I'm going to clean up the console log here because we probably don't need it anymore. And I'll replace it with a little bit of destructuring. I'm going to pull off the ID and title properties from this.props.library. So now when I call my onPress, I'm going to call the select library action creator with this particular ID. And then notice that down here as well at this.props.library.title, since I'm destructuring the title up here, I can just condense this down to just the title. There we go, just the title by itself. Okay, so remember the idea behind action creators after we've bound them with that connect helper at the bottom. In theory, whenever the action creator is called, it will return an action that gets sent off to all of our reducers in our application. So I think that at this point in time, we should add a console log statement to our selection reducer. I've got my selection reducer open right now. Let's add a console log to this thing to make sure that the action is showing up inside this. Okay, let's try it out. Inside of here, I'm going to console log, and I need to add on the arguments that the reducer is called for. Remember, reducers are always called with the state object, which is the state that was returned the last time this reducer was executed, and a second argument of action. So whenever I dispatch an action, it will show up as the second argument. So let's just log that action. Okay, so I'm going to flip over to my Chrome or my Chrome console, refresh my simulator, and wow, that was interesting. Look how we instantly got some console logs in here. It looks like our reducer, as we've mentioned many times previously, whenever our our application first boots up and Redux first starts up, it runs all of our reducers at least one time to assemble some type of initial state for our application. So this is that kind of boot up action that's coming through here. Now I should be able to tap on any row here and see an action flow through that reducer. And in fact, I do. I get an action of type select library, and it appears to have a payload attached to it, which should be the ID of the library that I just clicked on. So Webpack had an ID of 0. If I click on it, I get a payload of 0, yep. And then Axios at the very end has a payload of 8 because it has ID of 8. Awesome, this looks perfect right here. The last thing we have to do, now that we are receiving this action inside of our reducer, is make sure that our reducer watches for an action of type select library, and whenever it sees that, it should return the selected library's ID, and that way this reducer will create the selected library ID piece of state. So let's take care of that in the next section.